Good morning. I'm Mayor Tommy Roberts. Welcome to the Mayor's Table. My guest this morning, once again, is City Manager Rob Mays. Rob, it's good to have you back.
It's always good to be here.
We found that these segments are fun for us to do. We enjoy being able to provide information about what's going on at the City of Farmington to our viewers who are interested in what's going on at the City of Farmington. So we found this a very useful form of interacting with our citizens in our community. So I appreciate your involvement in that over the past 9 months or so. Rob, the topic this morning is one that follows up on last week's segment of the Mayor's Table, where we talked about some of the legal aspects that were brought out in an op-ed piece that was published in the September 18th edition of the Farmington Daily Times, an op-ed piece that was authored by the city manager of the city of Bloomfield, Mr. Eric Strahl. The op-ed piece had to do with the city of Bloomfield's quest to create and establish its own electric utility, which necessarily involves the assertion that it has the right to acquire all of the assets of the Farmington electric utility system that are located within the municipal boundaries of the city of Bloomfield. Last week, my guest was City Attorney Jennifer Brickell, and we took the opportunity to address some of the legal aspects of the litigation that currently is taking place between the city of Bloomfield and the city of Farmington regarding the scope of Bloomfield's right to acquire those assets. And Jennifer did a good job, I think, of explaining her reaction from a legal perspective to some of the assertions that Mr. Strahl made in his op-ed piece, which in my opinion were misleading in some case and were misrepresentations in some case. And particularly, Mr. Strahl made some assertions as to the scope of the judge's decisions in the current litigation as a result of the filing of a motion to dismiss by the city of Farmington. That motion to dismiss was based upon the assertion that the city of Bloomfield had waited too long to assert its rights. That Judge Daly in the case held in favor of Bloomfield and ruled that Bloomfield has not waited too long. That, in essence, disposed of that particular defense that we asserted. Now we move on to the very foundational issue, and that is, what is the scope of Bloomfield's right? One of the difficulties I had with Mr. Strahl's op-ed piece was that it asserted that the judge's decision essentially disposed of the question of what the scope of that right is, and it did no such thing. In fact, now we move on to the foundational issue as to scope. The other problem I had with the editorial, and it's the reason why we committed 2 segments of our Mayor's Table to this issue, is that Mr. Strahl has called out the city of Farmington and has asserted that we are delaying the legal process, we're prolonging the legal process simply in hopes that Bloomfield will tire of the litigation and will give up. And so I think I've adequately addressed that issue in my discussions with Jennifer. What we need to do now is, I think, move on to some of the practical aspects of Bloomfield's quest to establish its own electric utility. And I know you've given a lot of thought to this, but the very basic question that we have at this point is, why should the customers of the Farmington electric utility system be concerned about Bloomfield's move to acquire these assets currently owned by the FEUS? And not only why the citizens of Farmington and the customers who reside in Farmington should be concerned about it, but why should the residents and the business owners in Bloomfield be concerned about the city of Bloomfield's move here? Mm-hmm. So I want to leave it as a wide open question at this point and let you give an initial response, and then we'll drill down a bit as we go forward.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we're having to even deal with this. The city of Farmington has served customers in Bloomfield for 60 years with some of the most reliable and best priced electricity anywhere. And now we're having to deal with a number of misinformation and bad assumptions that are being purported to the public. In a nutshell, the reason this should matter to everyone is that we are stronger together than we are divided up. The electric industry is not an easy industry to be in. It's an industry that's going through a lot of changes, and it's important that we stay as large and as strong as we can in order to generate economies of scale that allow us to sell electricity as cheap as anyone in the entire multi-state region is doing it. So specifically, it starts with this premise that I believe that the citizens of Bloomfield are being led down a primrose path where they believe that they could make all this money. There's all this money that's just sitting there to be had, and they could solve all of their financial problems if they could own electric utility just like Farmington. And it's embedded in the language in the op-ed.
Let me set that up for you, and I'll quote from the op-ed piece by Mr. Strahl. In that op-ed piece, he says, each year electric utility customers in Bloomfield generate an estimated $1 million to $1.5 million in surplus funds. This money goes straight to Farmington's general fund and has been used for projects such as Ricketts Park and Pinion Hills Golf Course, all projects designed for the residents of Farmington to enjoy. His premise is that if they have their own electric utility, they'll have that $1 million to $1.5 million in surplus funds to help improve their community. What's the fallacy of that assertion?
It's just completely unreasonable, and there is no evidence that could suggest that it's possible for Bloomfield, as a small, tiny, isolated utility, could generate the same net revenues as a Farmington Electric Utility is able to generate from the sales that are associated with those customers that happen to reside inside of the corporate limits of Bloomfield. It has potential disastrous financial outcomes for their city. There's just incredible risk associated with it. What is true is that the Farmington Electric Utility did generate last year about $1.5 million of net revenue associated with those sales. Like I said, there's no evidence that Bloomfield could generate it without the same economies of scale. What's not true is the statement that this money goes straight to Farmington's general fund and to be used for projects. Let me talk about where that money actually went. The first thing we do is we retained $910,000 of that money to reinvest back in the system.
And that includes in Bloomfield?
Oh, absolutely. This is the portion of all of our revenue that's retained. That's the portion that's generated there. The actual projects change from year to year based on what's done. But if you actually spent all of your net revenue on your general fund quality of life projects, you would soon find you had a utility that was probably about as good a shape as Animas Water is dealing with. So we first reinvest $910,000 into the infrastructure, and to not only maintain reliability, but to keep rates low. That's one of the primary reasons why our rates are so low in comparison to others. And I'm going to talk more about rates in just a minute, because another huge reason people should be concerned about this is this has the potential to have significant impact on everyone's rates and rate stability in all of San Juan County, and disastrous potential effects on Bloomfield. And I want to develop that more in a minute.
So if we lose the Bloomfield component of our electric utility system, you're asserting that it will likely have some fairly significant impact on the remaining customers of the Farmington Electric Utility system.
Sure. The smaller we get, the less economies of scale, the less efficiencies, the less total kilowatt hours sold that we can divide up those fixed costs, hence requiring everything to go up. And when you make comparisons to the smaller communities around us and what their rate structures are, you begin to see the evidence of when you don't have those economies of scale.
And that's why the residents of Farmington who are our customers should care about this lawsuit and the outcome of the lawsuit. And that's why they should hope that we aggressively defend against the lawsuit.
That's right.
Now, the same argument that can be made for the citizens of Bloomfield, I think, in a lot of ways. They are currently the beneficiaries of reliable electricity at the best rates in the region. How could that be impacted by this move if Bloomfield is successful?
Well, I'll move on to rates right now.
Well, and before we do that, I think what I want to do is maybe close out this discussion about the assertion that Bloomfield would have $1 million to $1.5 million to put into their general fund for quality of life projects. In fact, of that $1.5 million that we generate from the Bloomfield segment of our system, you indicated that 60% of that goes back into the system in the way of maintenance and improvements. So 40%
and to keep rates low.
And to keep rates low. And 40% of that actually is transferred from our electric utility into our general fund. And so we do benefit our general fund with a portion of those sales. That's about $600,000.
That's right.
How does that $600,000 that goes into our general fund benefit the citizens of Bloomfield?
Well, again, back to this idea that we're stronger together, and as we look at regionalization, our tax rate is extremely low, and one of the reasons is that we have this revenue from the utility that does indeed supplement the general fund. But he mentions the projects, Rickett Park, Spin Hills Golf Course. Well, plenty of Bloomfield customers and visitors enjoy those projects as well. Another dramatic example is the library. 50 Bloomfield residents actually check out 56% more books in Farmington than Bloomfield residents actually do in their own library. And we don't charge them a penny for that. In fact, we absolutely welcome them as our guests and loyal patrons. Another example is the bus service, which has been in the news here lately, that Bloomfield has canceled their Red Apple bus service. Well, the way that system works is that route costs us about $24,000 a year. City of Farmington pays 12 of it, and we ask Bloomfield to pay for half of it, but we subsidize it 50%. Now, recently, they have cut that 50% payment and have canceled their contract for bus service. But we all benefit from the services that are operated in Farmington that serve this entire region.
So that dividend that the electric utility gives to the Farmington General Fund, we would assert benefits the citizens of Bloomfield because we are able in our community to keep our tax rate relatively low. We have one of the lowest gross receipts tax rates in the state of New Mexico. And we know that people from outside of Farmington come into the city of Farmington to obtain services for their entertainment. And they do that in large part because there's more available probably, but the tax rate is a factor there. And we contrast our tax rate against the tax rate in Bloomfield that the Bloomfield citizens are dealing with. And we have to observe that recently the Bloomfield City Council decided to raise tax rates. Actually, they put it out to a referendum vote. The citizens of Bloomfield voted to approve that tax increase that was proposed by the City Council. But the Bloomfield tax rate now is at 8%, which is on the high end of gross receipts tax rates in the state of New Mexico. So I think it's important for the citizens of Bloomfield, who are our customers, our electric utility customers, to recognize some of these facts. And I'm concerned that there hasn't been a lot of information put out into the public arena about these kinds of issues. And in reaction to Mr. Strahl's op-ed piece, which by the way is not the first, we ignored the first of those that was published about a year ago and felt it was better just to handle these issues in the judicial system and not in the court of public opinion. But we have no recourse now but to react to these challenges to our integrity and our good faith. So I'm glad we are having the opportunity to talk about those issues. Let's move along to rates.
Well, it's also important, though, to point out that they benefit much more directly than just having our low tax rate here. The Bloomfield General Fund received $214,408 from the City of Farmington Electric Utility last year.
So let's move on to rates. What should our customers who reside in Bloomfield be thinking in the context of rates? What questions should they be asking?
They should be asking, is there evidence that makes it reasonable to believe that no matter how good intentioned the leadership of Bloomfield is, to believe that they could purchase and start up a new electric utility and maintain rates as low as they are? I will tell you, Mr. Mayor, that if they do that, they will have accomplished something that no other utility seemingly has been able to accomplish. So it's not a matter of whether you believe me or believe Mr. Straw that says they're not going to raise their rates. You just need to look at the comparisons. This is a risky venture, and I believe a bad idea for everyone. All of our customers benefit from the economies of scale that are generated by the size of our utility. Bloomfield including, they get the same low rates as Farmington residents do. This is really the crux of the matter. We can debate the quality of life services and whether they should get 400 and we only getting 600, or whether that's fair. This is the real issue. The very next comparable utility to what Bloomfield is trying to do is the city of Aztec. And I'm not trying to pick on the city of Aztec. It's back to this economies of scale. They run a good utility, but they simply cannot run it as effectively as the city of Farmington can because of the size and the scope and the economies of scale. Aztec rates are between 28 and 32% higher than ours residential, and over 50% higher for our largest commercial businesses. That's significant. I don't think people let that soak in. Durango, that is also a nonprofit co-op. They don't have to pay profits or taxes. Their rates range from 31 to 44% higher than ours. I can go on and on with the investor-owned. In Albuquerque, residential rates about 23% higher than us. Denver, 12%. Phoenix, ranging from 6 to 21. The proof is in the product. All the rest of this, I don't think our customers care very much about, these legal arguments or these other areas. I think they care about what are the odds that Bloomfield can deliver on a promise as a very, very small, isolated utility, heavily in debt, startup utility can do better than Aztec, can do better than Durango. Aztec's got many, many years of experience in running a utility. It's not that we're smarter than them. It's just that we have the economies of scale, and it's impossible to believe, it's unreasonable to believe that Bloomfield could. So that's why I think Bloomfield residents should start paying attention to this.
It's clear that the city of Bloomfield would have to incur debt in order to create this electric utility. But the financial pro forma that we have access to that has been provided by the city of Bloomfield, in our opinion, would indicate that they've seriously underestimated the cost of starting up this utility. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. Like I said, this has all started on a revenue question. They believe that they could generate the same revenue we can. We don't believe they can. We don't believe they can maintain the rate structure that we have, and I've given the evidence for that. But you're speaking now really to these risk factors. I said earlier they've been led down a primrose path, and I believe Exhibit A to that is this so-called pro forma that they had done back in 2014. It's based on a lot of, at best you could characterize it as incomplete, and more negatively you could say it's absolutely inaccurate and wrong. Let me just hit briefly what's wrong with it. And we're going to be sending out some information to our customers in Bloomfield at the proper time. We're going to let the litigation play out, but at the proper time our citizens need to understand what's wrong with that feasibility study. First of all, they've grossly underestimated the significant costs associated with forming an electric utility. They actually have in their pro forma that the entire cost of forming an electric utility would be $6.9 million. We believe it could easily be 10 to 15 times that amount. So let's just talk about the debt service alone associated with that. But even if it's the 6 to 8 million that they think, which it's not, they've left out many, many factors in their pro forma that aren't even included in there. That's still a lot of debt. One of the reasons we're able to provide such low rates to our customers is not only the economies of scale, but we're debt-free. So we don't have to pass on interest charges and debt service to our customers. They completely underestimate the actual cost of operating a reliable utility. Let me read a quote from it. We plan to purchase one used bucket truck and have 4 linemen. What happens when you have multiple outages at one time? They're going to send their one crew out in their used bucket truck. Citizens of Bloomfield should be very concerned not only about rates, stability, about the risks associated with indebtedness, but about reliability and how they're going to maintain that reliability. There's absolutely no cash flow analysis in their in their pro forma. No sensitivity studies related to the risk associated with natural gas prices going back up. They laud the low gas prices now, but well, in not that many years ago, gas was 3 to 5 times what it is now. How are they going to absorb those risks into their small, tiny utility? That's why places like Aztec have such high rates. Is historically they've had exposure to market conditions that have hurt them. They've had no acknowledgement of the risk factors of their lack of diversity in their portfolio. Can you imagine them going into debt, 50, 60, 70, 80 million dollars? And 66% of their entire revenue was coming from just 3 customers. Those 3 customers right now have a combined drop of revenue of about 41%. And all of Bloomfield Electric's utility system is down 26%. Yet the city of Farmington and the entire system continues to help absorb that. We haven't raised Bloomfield's rates as a result of their sales being down 26% right now. We're subsidizing them by them being absorbed into the whole system. So they're benefiting right now from being a part. If they were on their own right now, they would have debt and they would be dealing with a 26% loss of revenue right now. Who's on the hook for that revenue? It's going to come right back to their taxpayers, and we're going to have to bail out their electric utility, let alone this idea that their utility can bail out their taxpayers, and that's what they're proposing right now. So that risk associated with debt service. They've completely left out of their pro forma one of the main expenses of operating a utility, which is you have to not only purchase that power out on the market and be subject to those market risks, you have to wheel that power into your system through the surrounding systems. That right now is a cost of $607,000. It's not even listed. So that's just a start to give you just a taste of all the things that are wrong with that pro forma. We tried to sit down. I tried to sit down with our former city manager. You tried to sit down with our mayor and one of their elected officials, and they absolutely would not listen to us as we tried to talk to them about the things that we've shared in this segment today. They've been determined to push ahead in spite of these risk factors and exposures.
So as we talk about the risk element, again, would like to just close this segment by maybe focusing more specifically on the pro forma rates that we are aware of. Their vision is that they can keep residential rates at the same level that the Bloomfield customers are receiving from the Farmington Electric Utility System. And this is based on their revenue projection of $6.9 million.
The cost. The entire cost of startup is $6.9 million.
The entire cost of startup of $6.9 million. We think it's going to be much higher than that. But their pro forma is actually founded on the industrial customers, the 3 or 4 large industrial customers that they picked up through an annexation of a few years ago to subsidize the residential rates. You pointed out that the industrial users' actual consumption of power has declined dramatically over the last 2 years, which makes sense because they're oil and gas industry related businesses. So it's just natural to come to the conclusion that the Bloomfield residential customers and business customers are vulnerable there if that industrial sector doesn't bring forward the revenues that they're projecting. Somehow the subsidy doesn't last and the residential users are vulnerable to picking up the shortfall.
Mr. Mayor, the good folks that live in Bloomfield should simply be asking themselves the question, is it reasonable to believe that first and foremost that they can maintain rates as a little tiny, isolated, heavily in debt utility, rates comparable to what they're used to? Or is it more likely that they'll see rates closer to Aztec, Durango's, and the other parts? Second, is it reasonable to believe that it makes good business sense to go into debt on a risky venture where 66% in the pro forma year that they're analyzing, 66% of the revenue came from 3 customers. Those 3 customers' sales today are down 44%. And of the remaining Bloomfield residential customers, and you throw it all in the same pot, the Bloomfield city limits that they're fighting to take from us is down 26% in sales. So right now, frankly, we're subsidizing Bloomfield. The rest of the system is. But we do believe when you take the long view, it's important that we stay together and keep our keep our system as large as we possibly can so that we can continue to allow everyone to have low rates and reliable service.
I think I want to make another point before we close it out, and it has to do with the projected cost to Bloomfield of acquiring these assets. They've assigned a value of $6.9 million. You pointed out some of the deficiencies associated with that projection. Two of the major costs that aren't apparently factored into their pro forma, at least we haven't seen any evidence that they've been factored in, are the stranded costs that they must compensate the city of Farmington for and the separation costs that they must compensate us for. And these are cost components of an acquisition that have been recognized in case law that has resolved disputes of similar kind in the past. So generally the court cases recognize that separation costs and stranded costs are components of the overall acquisition costs. And it's another problem with the pro forma that's being put out there. Rob, I think we've covered about as much as we can cover in a short segment. We've probably gone longer than we normally have, but I must say that I regret in some ways that we feel compelled to argue in the court of public opinion that the Bloomfield move in our thought process is not the best thought out process, but I think that we had no choice than to respond to this op-ed piece that was published by Mr. Strahl, which attempted to put Farmington and cast Farmington in somewhat of a bad light in the court of public opinion. We feel that we have very legitimate reasons for pursuing the litigation in the way we have. We are not hoping that Bloomfield gets tired of it and drops its litigation and hopes it and that it gives up in this pursuit. We believe that they are very serious about their move and their effort, and we don't question that sincerity. But we do feel at this point in time now we need to get out the word that is our belief that this is not a wise move. And we will continue to pursue that now in the court of public opinion as a result of this op-ed piece and Mr. Strahl's earlier letter to the editor from about a year ago. So, Rob, I want to thank you for being my guest here this morning. We hope that our viewers have learned something. We could talk a long time about this issue, but we better close it off now. I want to thank all of you for viewing this segment of the Mayor's Table, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next Monday.